And I thought that was a very useful thing for them, and I still do. That what is the very smallest beginning you'll make in a drama? What will be your first 2 words? And where will you be? And what energy will those 2 words be carrying? And what intonation and burden of possibilities? And I think working very, very slowly like that, people realising you'll sing God Save the King 200 times. And it's not a failure, it's a success. So that was a stage I seemed to go through. Always carrying the can though. Yes. If they put up with the urine, because I couldn't be in every position, I'll carry the can. And that led me, I think anyway, to something that I was using yesterday. I knew my 2 ugly sisters could be 2 old ladies with no toes or heels. And I knew that would get me into Cinderella, dead centre, because she's now married and so on. But I don't worry about what else will happen. I know it will, because it's so right that I can sit back and watch for opportunities.
Yes.
It will work. It's like the centre of the play begins here.
That's right.
And if I did watch television, like if I were watching, say, Brief Encounter, I mean, obviously I've seen that when I was younger and could bear to watch. If it began with a train steaming away from a platform or into a platform, all the potential of that is what I'd be paying attention to. You see, I'd miss half of Brief Encounter through the symbolic train and how many things it's doing. And getting things simple, I think, is one of the things I've tried in my very seemingly complicated ways.
It's like Michael Ayrton's tree.
Yes, 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 yes. And somebody's photographed the same silver birch for 20 years. Well, it'll be 40 years now. It's about 20 years since I heard about it. And because it's never the same.
No.
And yet it's the same.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Now, what about Mantle the Expert? How did that begin?
Well, I taught a week before I realised it, of course. It was we were all on a school project. I'd realised that helping teachers plan projects was a very useful way for me to learn where they were at, because they would make their own plans, how they'd teach their class. So I'd begin to spot, there's something there they need help with, or they don't understand this, or that's a good idea, but they're dealing with it in a very peculiar way that is not helping them, you know, bossy clogs, without necessarily saying it to them. And on this occasion, we were going to take over the whole school, and it was an inner city school right down by the river. And the teacher had done a full-time primary course and knew me well. And she said, I wish you'd take over the nativity play because it's awful. I'd like to get changes, but I find it tricky. So I said, well, why doesn't the whole school deal with, you know, they're going to be taxed and the Annunciation if you fancy it soon enough, you know, and we'll all end up at the inn, and we'll just have to put the wise men in rather early, like the morning after. And so she agreed. And when we got the planning started, I realised nobody was terribly interested in the wise men, you see. And I thought, well, the children might expect this, because so many Christmas cards are full of wise men and we three kings and whatnot. So I'd sort of noticed this and thought, well, I'll see whether there's any kids left over, and if there's any kids left over, I'll do wise men. Knowing I wouldn't be able to see a piece of work at all, and it would only be on Friday afternoon we would turn up and everybody else would have gone, sort of thing. Anyway, when we got there and they began to work on it, the head said to me, I've got 3 really difficult children in school. And I thought, oh, wise men. You know, the way she was putting it was saying, I really don't know the best to do because they run away. There were children whose grandmothers never knew where they were and their parents were working and these lads were adventurous. Excuse me, that's the front door. I don't know what it is. I'm sorry about this. And there was no space in the school except this sort of halfway down to a boiler room. Curious little cellar place. And it had this big table in it with 4 thick legs. And I remember saying, you know, 3 kings went to see Jesus. And I shut the door thinking, well, they can't run away from here easy. And 3 kings went to see Jesus. And I think they should have made their wills before they went.
And what made you say that?
It was something to do with doing something that wasn't acting. And being very important. And inventing being very rich.
Having a lot to leave.
Having a lot to leave. And they started on with, well, I would have all my gold, like that would be, and they went on like this. And I said, and they would have, I had a feeling they needed to get out of the cellar for a bit. So I said, they'd have different ways of writing their wills, like they might carve them on a big tablet. And we ended up, one wrote his on the schoolyard. It was a huge will. Another wrote it. The school was coal-fired. They still had the old boiler and heaps of coal or coke, I suppose it was. Anyway, another wrote it. He was going to write in coal and I got charcoal. And he wrote it on a huge piece of brown paper. And we had to do it all in the schoolyard because I daren't let this boy out on his own in case he ran away. And I can't now remember what the third one did, but they were very big wills. And I can remember thinking, well, now we've done our wills, we're really on the way. And I didn't bother about stars and telescopes or wisdom or anything. It was just, had we checked that everything we'd got down was there. And I realised they had quite interesting things. They weren't all cliche things, but neither were they teddy bears. They weren't kids' things either. So once they'd got rid of their bags of gold and so on, there were some very interesting gardens and things that they left. And that's when I said, I understand, they rode a long way. And I'd looked at this table and thought, it's a great camel, this. Because it was about as big as a billiard table. So you could have 3 kings, you know. And they each had a leg for the camel, you know. And I just became the servant, and I realised they have to meet a lot of different episodes. Because this is a storyline. So every day, every hour, these children can become more kings if they meet the kinds of experiences that will make them slowly realise they really are on their own. So that's when I decided they'll have to buy water. And I nearly got Jesus' gold, of course. I nearly bought it in Jesus' gold. But a big problem there. And as the week went on, well, as the week went on, I just realised this is more and more right, because they were coming in saying, do you know what I think? I think we should have a camel die and see how we get on. And we'll have to go and find another camel, and we'll have to buy a camel or work for it. And they began to come in and they were obsessed. I hadn't a single problem.
Yeah. Now I can see how you decided that setting them a task
Yes,
was going to provide a dynamic.
yes,
And that Mantle of expert work is setting the right tasks in the right order,
yes,
at the right timing.
yeah.
But what makes you say camel?
Yes.
And what makes you know that they're going to have to actually sit on something to represent camels?
Well, I
Because
think,
that's different.
yes, yes it is. I would have thought it would be two things. One would be their cliche view of the kings would probably be sitting on camels because
Yes, overweight
those
to
are
look
all
important.
the pictures in the Bible,
Yeah.
in the children's Bible. And the other would be, I think, they needed individualising. And the table, I'd have done it, I think, with pieces of paper and camels on the
Yeah.
floor.
Yeah.
They needed to be differently unique and treated separately.
Yes.
And the table, of course, was ideal because you could hang things on it. So symbolically, we hung
Yeah.
all sorts of things on. But,
And did you feel they needed to feel journeying?
oh yes, yes. And
So between
because
tasks,
that's right.
there had to be journeying.
Yes,
Yeah.
oh yes. And also, if you had a camel to get on, you'd have a camel to walk beside. We spent a lot of time walking because I didn't have a
Yeah.
camel.
Yeah.
Because it was wrong for me to sit on the table. I would have been
Yeah.
too big on the table with the three boys anyway. It was, yes, it's what you, by having this, you got all these others.
Yes. Yeah.
The lying down under the camel, the
Yes.
sitting on the camel, the
Yes.
walking beside the camel, and then of course the adventure where the camel was tied up. I mean, we couldn't move the table, it was in the middle of the room.
Yeah.
Things happened in the corners
Yes.
and so on.
Yes.
We had long sleeping times where we dreamed. And I remember we told our dreams a lot. And you see, at first they were king dreams, and then they'd say, can we have a dream?
Yeah.
And then I'd say, well, what about a worry dream?
Mm.
We could have a worry dream, or we could have a scary dream, or we could have a... So we had lots of dreams.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting week in all sorts of ways, because it
Yeah.
broke up
Yes.
in... And I don't ever remember having to think what else could happen. What else could happen? It sort of was naturally happening. And they were bringing... They never wanted to dress up. They never brought anything in.
So would you say that one of the key features of Mantle, the expert approach, is that each part of carrying out a task feeds the next,
Yes. Breeds. In a way.
breeds it. Yes.
It's always foreshadowing.
Yes.
I mean, yesterday, the amount foreshadowed in just making that map, had I done it
Yes.
properly, you couldn't have begun to tell the Norwegians how much
No.
would be bred and learned. Who can read?
Yes.
You know, just that.
Yeah.
Who in the class can read
Yes.
is coming out.
Mm.
It's always full of, it's
Yes.
birthing something else, even as it's now.
Now, what are its other characteristics?
Well, it causes certain problems for teachers, which I think would have to be faced, and it always does it. We'll go back to the kings a minute. If you are a king, you really have to have a teacher who understands theatre, because you cannot be asked in Mantle of the Expert to be a king this minute and be a poor man the next. So the teacher has to create contexts in which the consideration of poverty the demonstration and the exploration of poverty becomes available through being a king. And that's really hard.
Yes.
And I didn't get into that yesterday,
No.
because it would have overwhelmed. So, you never have a client, is what I said to them yesterday. So when we come to look at these poor people, you see, I started inventing the images of clients, that later they can show me how a client was last night, which is what you were doing in another way. So that is a definite feature that has to be faced.
Yeah.
That I can't have one of my group suddenly become Cinderella. Princess Ella, as she would have to be all the time. No way. But using the different kinds of framings, we can have Cinderella, or we can have a role, of course, as Princess Ella. So that is a definite feature. So your king is a king, and must see the world through the king's eye and experience, which in a way makes it even more important for learning, because how can a king understand poverty is a dimension that is far better than, as a child, can you understand poverty? It comes much closer to groping and struggling to understand it.
I think I once described the way you work as prismatic.
Yes.
That you've just given an example of distorting theatre.
Yes.
That the theatre is seeing poverty through a king's eyes. But that's also, in learning terms, that's also a way of distorting knowledge so that you can engage with it.
Yes.
And that seems to me to be one of the secrets that you have always worked with.
Yes, yes. I think
Whatever
that's
method
true.
you've used,
Yes.
you've always found a way
Yes,
of
you've broken the
refocusing the
line.
light.
Yes, yes.
Refraction.
Yes, that's right. Yes, I think you're right. Now, to me, it's a sort of zestful challenge, because I wouldn't think any further forward than I did yesterday in the work we were doing. I would know all the rest will naturally come as I grow wiser in the material and see the depth of the possibilities, as you were doing with what you were doing. But I do know I need the three elements that I did introduce, you see.
Yes.
So I have to be sure of that. The three kings must arrive at Bethlehem.
Yes.
Otherwise it isn't fair to the children. They must arrive. And if one were working with them more, they could become the magi who later, in Eliot's terms, wonder about the journey. So they could come back and take up the reins if time allowed. I think too, with Mantle the Expert, the teacher's language is a factor that is incredibly important.
Yes.
Because as you can't really do didactic information giving.
No.
You can step out of role and say, well, this is going to demand this, as I did yesterday. But you can't actually preach your knowledge.
No. From within.
That's right.
No.
Yes. So if you want them to know about how fire brigades get water, you can't stand there and tell them.
Yeah.
And that I think is something that teachers sort of watch and realise vaguely there's something important there, but feel it's very difficult because it seems amorphous.
Yeah. Yes. You use a lot of colloquial language.
Yes.
That you must be conscious of.
Yes, because you've got to use there's a sociological term for it. Restricted code. You've got to use restricted code when talking to a colleague.
Yes.
Otherwise, you become a preacher to your colleague. Yes. So you must use restricted code. And when you use extended code, which is the code teachers usually use when they're teaching, you can only use it when permission is given in some way that they'll accept it from you.
And sometimes
extended code, that's it.
You will actually move into
Very,
your broadest Yorkshire accent.
That's right. Yes.
And you're doing that consciously.
Yes. Teaching is very controlled to me. Because you've got no right ever to be angry with somebody. You can be angry about something, but you've no right to express anger on to somebody.
Yes.
So, I mean, that would be at the very worst end that you might suffer from. Total irritation, that you can't stand this any longer and you shout at them. That would terrify me if I had to do it. And I've always resisted. I've tried every system I could never to have to do it. But I'm sure I must have done it sometime, I don't know. But it would be so painful. I think I would almost feel, well, never ever teach again. And that, I think, is, you learn the skills of, it's not avoidance, it's control that is out of bounds, this behaviour. You're not paid to be exasperated, and show it. You can be exasperated. And indeed with my student, I mean, I've come home and cried when I've been upset by feeling, well, they're not getting this and I'm hopeless at it, and am I doing right? And Raymond would just say, well, what's the new denominator? Have you suddenly gone mad? Because I haven't been able to see a way.